Blood had already dried on the porch by the time investigators reached the house. Not a large amount, but enough to tell them one thing immediately. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie had not simply disappeared. Something had happened here. The quiet home in the Catalina foothills north of Tucson, Arizona, now sat at the center of a mystery that investigators would soon begin reconstructing minute by minute. A security camera had stopped functioning. A masked individual had been captured near the entrance of the home in the early hours of the morning, and somewhere within a narrow window of time, Nancy Guthrie vanished. But as detectives began examining the evidence left behind, one possibility started to grow more important than almost anything else. And because sometimes the most important evidence in an abduction case does not stay at the crime scene. Sometimes it leaves. It travels on roads. It moves through neighborhoods. And sometimes the truth of what happened is carried away inside a vehicle. Tonight we are going to examine the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie through the timeline investigators have publicly acknowledged, the surveillance footage collected from the neighborhood, and the reason vehicles, and the movement they reveal, may hold the key to understanding what happened that night. If you follow investigations where a single detail can change the direction of a case, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Bond. On this channel, we slow down the timeline and examine how real investigations unfold step by step. Because in the case of Nancy Guthrie, the answer investigators are searching for may not come from one dramatic revelation. It may come from a route, a timestamp, or a vehicle that moved through the neighborhood at exactly the wrong moment. To understand why investigators became so focused on movement, we have to go back to the final confirmed hours before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old and living alone in a quiet residential area in the Catalina foothills region near Tucson, Arizona. The neighborhood sits along the edge of the desert landscape at the base of the Santa Catalina Mountains. Large homes are spaced apart by winding streets, and after dark the area becomes extremely quiet. Friends and family described Nancy as independent and active. She maintained regular contact with loved ones and followed a fairly predictable routine. There was nothing about the evening of January 31st, 2026, that initially suggested anything unusual. Earlier that evening, Nancy attended a family dinner. According to confirmed reporting, she had taken an Uber ride to the gathering and later returned home with family members who dropped her off sometime shortly before 10 o'clock that night. The moment appeared completely ordinary. The garage door opened. Nancy entered her home. Moments later, the garage door closed. That simple sequence would later become one of the final confirmed moments investigators could place on the timeline. From that point forward, the night grows quiet. For the people living nearby, nothing seemed out of place. No one reported hearing a disturbance. No one called police to report suspicious activity. But somewhere between that moment and the early morning hours, something happened. And detectives believe that whatever occurred during that narrow window of time involved a level of planning that immediately changed the tone of the investigation. Concern about Nancy began the following morning. She was expected to appear at a scheduled church live-stream gathering, something family members say she rarely missed. When she failed to join the meeting, people began trying to reach her. Calls went unanswered. Messages were not returned. As the hours passed, concern grew. Eventually, authorities were contacted, and deputies were sent to conduct a welfare check at the home. When investigators arrived, the scene immediately raised serious concern. At the entrance of the house, they discovered blood on the porch. The presence of blood suggested that something had happened at the doorway during the night. Inside the surrounding neighborhood, detectives began reviewing surveillance cameras, and it was during that process that investigators discovered footage that would become one of the earliest clues in the case. A camera captured a person approaching the home during the early morning hours. The individual appeared to be wearing a mask. Authorities described the person as male, approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, carrying what appeared to be a backpack. The footage did not reveal exactly what the individual did at the house, but the timing of the appearance placed the masked person near the home during the same period. Investigators believe Nancy Guthrie disappeared. At the same time, the investigators noticed that certain devices around the home had stopped functioning during the night. Reports later indicated that internet connectivity disruptions may have occurred around the same time window. Whether those interruptions were coincidental or related to the crime has not been publicly confirmed, but the timing became another piece of the timeline investigators needed to understand. One of the most important data points in the investigation came from a medical device Nancy was known to wear. Nancy Guthrie had a pacemaker capable of transmitting Bluetooth data. According to investigators, the device stopped communicating with connected systems at approximately 2:28 in the morning. For detectives, that timestamp became extremely important, and it represented one of the final technological indicators of Nancy's presence near the home. From an investigative standpoint, that moment may represent the time when Nancy left the device's signal range. It may represent the moment she was taken from the property, or it may represent the moment when events escalated into violence. Whatever the explanation, investigators now had a narrow window of time. And once investigators establish a timeline window, the next step becomes movement. Who entered the neighborhood during that time? Who left? Which vehicles were present? And which ones should not have been there at all? This is where vehicles become central to investigations like this. Cars are not simply transportation. They record movement. They carry physical traces. And they can help investigators reconstruct routes that may reveal how someone entered and exited a crime scene. As detectives expanded the investigation, they began requesting surveillance footage from residents throughout the surrounding area. They asked homeowners to review cameras not only for the hours surrounding the disappearance, but also for earlier dates. The reason for that request was important. Investigators wanted to know whether anyone had been studying the neighborhood ahead of time. If someone had visited the area before the crime occurred, it could indicate preparation. Preparation often involves identifying routes, where to enter, where to leave, which roads are quiet, where cameras are positioned, and how quickly someone could move through the area without attracting attention. If planning occurred, where transportation would almost certainly have been involved, which means a vehicle may have played a role long before Nancy disappeared. Ring cameras and other surveillance systems captured several vehicles passing through the neighborhood during the night. For investigators, every one of those vehicles had to be examined. Some belonged to residents, others belonged to visitors. But detectives were looking for something specific. Vehicles that appeared during the narrow timeline window. Vehicles that moved in ways that did not match normal neighborhood traffic. Vehicles that entered and left quickly. And vehicles that appeared near the home around the same time the masked person was seen. In many abduction investigations, vehicles become what investigators sometimes call timeline containers. They preserve movement. A car passing a camera can establish direction. Another camera further down the road can confirm a route. Together, these pieces can reconstruct how someone traveled through an area. As the Nancy Guthrie investigation continued, detectives began comparing timestamps from multiple cameras positioned along surrounding streets. Each clip represented only a few seconds, but those seconds mattered. If a vehicle appeared on one street at 2:26 in the morning and then appeared again several minutes later on another road, investigators could begin mapping a route. This type of analysis allows detectives to understand not just who may have been present, but how someone moved. Movement reveals patterns. Patterns reveal planning, and planning can reveal intent. At the same time, our forensic teams continued analyzing the physical evidence collected from Nancy's home. Authorities later confirmed that the blood discovered on the porch belonged to Nancy Guthrie. That finding strengthened the belief that she had been taken from the property against her will. The investigation soon expanded into a large-scale search effort. Local law enforcement agencies were joined by federal authorities, including the FBI. Helicopters scanned the surrounding desert landscape. Drones searched remote areas. Specialized canine units were deployed to track potential scent trails. Thousands of tips from the public began arriving. Each tip had to be examined carefully. Each potential sighting had to be verified. But despite the extensive search, Nancy Guthrie was not found. As the case gained national attention, our investigators emphasized the importance of focusing on verified evidence. Authorities cautioned the public about spreading speculation online. In particular, law enforcement officials confirmed that family members had been ruled out as suspects. That distinction was important because the investigation needed to remain grounded in facts. The focus remained on the timeline, the masked individual, the forensic evidence, and the movement of vehicles through the neighborhood during the critical window of time. One report that investigators examined involved a sighting weeks before the disappearance. A neighbor reported seeing a man walking slowly through the neighborhood on January 11th, several weeks before Nancy vanished. According to the neighbor, the individual appeared to be studying the homes along the street, and authorities have not publicly confirmed whether that sighting was connected to the crime, but investigators considered the possibility that the neighborhood may have been observed ahead of time. If the area had been studied before the disappearance, it could suggest the crime was not random. It could suggest planning. And if planning occurred, then vehicles may have played an even larger role. Someone observing the neighborhood would likely need transportation. Someone preparing a route would need to understand how to enter and exit without drawing attention. Someone committing an abduction would almost certainly require a vehicle to leave the area quickly. All of those possibilities returned investigators to the same question. Which vehicle moved through the neighborhood at the critical moment? During the early days of the investigation, another development briefly captured attention. A message demanding ransom appeared connected to the case, reportedly requesting payment in cryptocurrency. Authorities acknowledged the message and began analyzing its origin. However, investigators have not publicly confirmed whether the message was authentic or connected to the disappearance. The possibility that individuals may attempt to exploit high-profile investigations for attention or financial gain is not uncommon. As a result, detectives carefully evaluate such communications before drawing conclusions. Throughout the investigation, authorities repeatedly used a specific word when describing the case: targeted. When investigators say a victim was targeted, it suggests the crime was not random. And it suggests someone may have known something about the victim. It suggests someone may have been aware of routines or schedules. And it suggests the possibility that the crime involved planning. Planning leaves patterns. Patterns often involve movement. Movement often involves vehicles. That is why investigators continue examining every car captured on camera during the hours surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Because somewhere in that footage may be the route that reveals what happened. As of the most recent updates, the case remains active. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Investigators continue reviewing surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and witness statements. Authorities have indicated that the investigation is progressing, though many details remain undisclosed. In cases like this, our breakthroughs often occur quietly. A timestamp aligns with a route. A vehicle matches a camera sighting. A piece of forensic evidence connects two locations. Sometimes the turning point in an investigation is not dramatic. Sometimes it is a detail that quietly survives every test investigators apply. The disappearance of Nancy Guthrie continues to leave a family waiting for answers, a community still searching for understanding, and investigators working to piece together the truth hidden inside a timeline that begins with a quiet evening and ends with an unanswered question. What really happened during those early morning hours in the Catalina foothills? Was the answer captured by a camera? Was it carried away along a road investigators are still reconstructing? Or is the key to the case sitting inside a piece of evidence that has not yet been revealed? If you want to continue following cases where investigators unravel the truth piece by piece, make sure to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Bond. Because sometimes the answer to a mystery is not lost. Sometimes it is simply waiting inside the timeline for the final detail to bring everything into focus.